So it's a kind of way, it's a natural reflex that we just say buy green products, develop green procurement programs. I think that's a very dominant way of looking at it, but it's lacking a kind of sensitivity for the cultural dimension. And I think the cultural dimension should be upgraded in this kind of studies. And when we look at the way culture is treated by environmental scientists so far, it is in a very kind of, I would say, moralistic way. You should do your bit for the environment, save energy and so on. So they are very kind of directive sayings, and they are framed very often in a negative way. If we don't start consuming in a more sustainable way, then something awful will happen. There will be more environmental risk happening there. Especially Ulrich Beck is, of course, strong about this point with his risk society. It's all about risk that we are bothering ourselves. Well, I was not very satisfied with that kind of cultural framing of sustainable consumption. And that's why I was so happy to learn more about the work of Randall Collins, because his work is on the kind of the symbol and the cultural dimension of consumption, but it is approached from a more kind of positive perspective. He's not very much into sustainable consumption. I don't think he has ever done work on that. But what he offers is that when people share consumption practices together, and the sharing of the practice is of course crucial, then they get kind of excited from doing things together. They get emotional energy from doing consumption together. And I think main challenge for sustainable consumption researchers is to find kind of practices of sustainable consumption that really gives you energy, that gives you positive emotional feelings, that give you a feeling of behaving well. Doing your bit for the environment, yeah, but then in a way that really gives me a good feeling, and then a feeling that I share with the people that are relevant to me, my friends and my co-fellows in the supermarket that I trust, etc. So I have to be very short on that, but Collins is, for me, one of the authors that can point the way to a more positive, less negative, less risk-based analysis of the cultural dimension of sustainable consumption. So I come to my case study. And I think I have 50 minutes left, about. Good. My case study is on food, more particular food labels. And food labels as they are, because they are, I just took a few from a PhD that did some work on food labeling, but it's just in 5 minutes time. But you can see there are many food labels around here, and they are kind of dropped in the market to more or less have a role in supporting consumers in making the right green choices, etc. So they are kind of the symbols of more sustainable consumption. But there is a huge discussion also in industry. Are they really effective? Do they work? Should we go on along the way of all these kind of labeling and certification systems, or should we get rid of them again? And this is a very interesting topic. It's also with high policy relevance. For example, in the UK, Tesco was discussing introducing a carbon label for food. And we thought we should take the carbon label for food. It's a symbol yet in the making. Have you seen such a carbon label for food in Brazil? There are a few products, some chips, I think, and also here with the Tesco label. But it is, let's say, a new element. It's an innovation. An innovation in the food sector, which is not invented because of consumers. It's of course invented for business-to-business competition between people in the food supply system. But my argument for sustainable consumption research is that it should be meaningful to consumers when they entering the food practice, when they organize certain everyday life practices. So what we did was a research on the practice of having lunch in a canteen. You think about the canteen at school or at work. so that people have lunch together. And we had a restaurant of the future in Wageningen, which is part of Wageningen University. And there you have a huge technical equipment to monitor what is happening in the restaurant when you introduce certain innovations. So it's a kind of a laboratory. And we use that restaurant of the future to introduce carbon labels to the lunch canteen practice. And we were primarily interested in how are they taken up or not taken up by consumers. And what do we mean by being taken up, being appropriated, being domesticated in their practice? Would it result in a change of the practice of canteen lunch? That was the kind of theoretical question in this case study. And then I should again tell you a little bit about Dutch culture, because I'm sure when you are from Italy or from Brazil or from almost any part of the world, then you would not imagine how a Dutch lunch would look like. Because it's something, let's say, my students say it's cheap and dirty and fast. So you should bear that in mind. But it is a highly established routine which is recognized by all Dutch people. They go to a place for 20 to 30 minutes, somewhere in between 12 and 1:30. They spend from about 2 to 5 euros. So that's, let's say, 4 to 10. Well, and they have a sandwich, soup, milk, salad, and fruit. Sometimes they bring the sandwich from home, and they just combine it with the soup at work, because we are also savers in the Netherlands. And you go and have lunch not just on your own, but you normally go with a group to the restaurant. You go together with your colleagues. And it is not paid for. It's your own time. You have a lunch break. It means a break in between 2 periods of work. So it's also private time in between 2 work times. That's the Dutch lunch canteen. And we discussed with people later how they define the lunch, and this is actually what all people share. So this is an example of a practice. It's shared knowledge. It's ways of knowing and doing how. You see, all the participants to the lunch canteen, they share this kind of knowledge. That's the Schatzky part of it. So what we had as a hypothesis, when you just bring a label to a practice without other things, then people will just, not accept it. It's the discussion we have with the people from psychology, that if you just bring information, that people start changing their behavior automatically. That will not happen. So we had as a first hypothesis, if you just smuggle in a label, a carbon label to the practice, so you attach a kind of a figure to all the food products, high and low carbon scores, then nothing much will happen. That was the first hypothesis. Because we wanted to have a deroutinization of the practice happening. We wanted people to be shaken up, people to start thinking about food and climate change and what this label had to do with it. So we needed more kind of encompassing interventions, a series of interventions in the practice in order to create this level of deroutinization that we are aiming at. When that would be done, when you just don't present only a label, but a lot of information and other things around it, then we were assuming that there would be a change in the practice starting to emerge.